5. The Wood-Sawyer. 1 year and 3 months. During all that time Lucy was never sure, from hour to hour, but that the guillotine would strike off her husband's head next day. Every day, through the stony streets, the tumbrils now jolted heavily, filled with condemned. Lovely girls, bright women, brown-haired, black-haired, and grey. Youths, stalwart men and old, gentle-born and peasant-born, all red wine filler. Guillotine, all daily brought into light from the dark cellars of the loathsome prisons, and carried to her through the streets to slake her devouring thirst. Liberty, equality, fraternity, or death, the last, much the easiest to bestow. Oh, guillotine! If the suddenness of her calamity, and the whirling wheels of the time, had stunned the doctor's daughter into awaiting the result in idle despair, it would but have been with her as it was with many. But, from the hour when she had taken the white head to her fresh young bosom in the garret of Saint Antoine, she had been true to her duties. She was truest to them in the season of trial, as all the quietly loyal and good will always be. As soon as they were established in their new residence, and her father had entered on the routine of his avocations, she arranged the little household as exactly as if her husband had been there. Everything had its appointed place and its appointed time. Little Lucy she taught as regularly as if they had all been united in their English home. The slight devices with which she cheated herself into the show of a belief that they would soon be reunited, the little preparations for his speedy return, the setting aside of his chair and his books, these, and the solemn prayer at night for one dear prisoner especially, among the many unhappy souls in prison and the shadow of death, were almost the only outspoken reliefs of her heavy mind. She did not greatly alter in appearance. The plain dark dresses, akin to morning dresses, which she and her child wore, were as neat and as well attended to as the brighter clothes of happy days. She lost her color, and the old and intent expression was a constant, not an occasional, thing. Otherwise, she remained very pretty and comely. Sometimes, at night, on kissing her father, she would burst into the grief she had repressed all day, and would say that her sole reliance, under heaven, was on him. He always resolutely answered, nothing can happen to him without my knowledge, and I know that I can save him. Lucy. They had not made the round of their changed life many weeks, when her father said to her, on coming home one evening, "My dear, there is an upper window in the prison, to which Charles can sometimes gain access at 3 in the afternoon. When he can get to it, which depends on many uncertainties and incidents, he might see you in the street. He thinks, if you stood in a certain place, that I can show you. But you will not be able to see him, my poor child, and even if you could, it would be unsafe for you to make a sign of recognition. Oh, show me the place, my father, and I will go there every day." From that time, in all weathers, she waited there 2 hours. As the clock struck 2, she was there, and at 4 she turned resignedly away. When it was not too wet or inclement for her child to be with her. They went together at other times she was alone, but she never missed a single day. It was the dark and dirty corner of a small winding street. The hovel of a cutter of wood into lengths for burning was the only house at that end. All else was wall. On the third day of her being there, he noticed her. "Good day, citizeness." "Good day, citizen." This mode of address was now prescribed by decree. It had been established voluntarily some time ago among the more thorough patriots, but was now law for everybody. "Walking here again, citizeness." "You see me, citizen." The Wood-Sawyer, who was a little man with a redundancy of gesture, he had once been a mender of roads, cast a glance at the prison, pointed at the prison, and putting his 10 fingers before his face to represent bars, peeped through them jocosely. "But it's not my business," said he, and went on sawing his wood. Next day he was looking out for her, and accosted her the moment she appeared. "What? Walking here again, citizeness?" "Yes, citizen." "Ah, a child too. Your mother, is it not, my little citizeness?" "Do I say yes, mamma?" whispered little Lucy, drawing close to her. "Yes, dearest. Yes, citizen." "Ah, but it's not my business. My work is my business. See my saw. I call it my little guillotine. La 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 la. And off his head comes. The billet fell as he spoke, and he threw it into a basket. I call myself the Samson of the firewood guillotine. See here again. Loo, loo. Loo, 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 loo. And off her head comes. Now a child. Tickle, tickle, tickle. Pickle. And off its head comes. All the family. Lucy shuddered as he threw 2 more billets into his basket, but it was impossible to be there while the Wood-Sawyer was at work, and not be in his sight. Thenceforth, to secure his goodwill, she always spoke to him first, and often gave him drink money, which he readily received. He was an inquisitive fellow, and sometimes when she had quite forgotten him, in gazing at the prison roof and grates, and in lifting her heart up to her husband, she would come to herself to find him looking at her, with his knee on his bench, and his saw stopped in its work. But it's not my business. He would generally say at those times, and would briskly fall to his sawing again. In all weathers, in the snow and frost of winter, in the bitter winds of spring, in the hot sunshine of summer, in the rains of autumn, and again in the snow and frost of winter, Lucy passed 2 hours of every day at this place, and every day, on leaving it, she kissed the prison wall. Her husband saw her, so she learned from her father. It might be once in 5 or 6 times, it might be twice or thrice running, it might be not for a week or a fortnight together. It was enough that he could and did see her when the chances served, and on that possibility she would have waited out the day, 7 days a week. These occupations brought her round to the December month, wherein her Father walked among the terrace with a steady head. On a lightly snowing afternoon she arrived at the usual corner. It was a day of some wild rejoicing and a festival. She had seen the houses, as she came along, decorated with little pikes, and with little red caps stuck upon them, also with tricolored ribbons. Also, with the standard inscription, tricolored letters were the favorite. Republic one and indivisible. Liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. The miserable shop of the Wood-Sawyer was so small that its whole surface furnished very indifferent space for this legend. He had got somebody to scrawl it up for him, however, who had squeezed death in with most inappropriate difficulty. On his house top he displayed pike and cap, as a good citizen must. And in a window he had stationed his saw, inscribed as his little saint. Guillotine, for the great sharp female was by that time popularly canonized. His shop was shut and he was not there, which was a relief to Lucy, and left her quite alone. But he was not far off, for presently she heard a troubled movement and a shouting coming along, which filled her with fear. A moment afterwards, and a throng of people came pouring round the corner by the prison wall, in the midst of whom was the Wood-Sawyer hand in hand with the vengeance. There could not be fewer than 500 people, and they were dancing like 5,000 demons. There was no other music than their own singing. They danced to the popular revolution song, keeping a ferocious time that was like a gnashing of teeth in unison. Men and women danced together, women danced together, men danced together, as hazard had brought them together. At first, they were a mere storm of coarse red caps and coarse woolen rags, but, as they filled the place, and stopped to dance about Lucy, some ghastly apparition of a dance figure, gone raving mad, arose among them. They advanced, retreated, struck at one another's hands, clutched at one another's heads, spun round alone, caught one another and spun round in pairs, until many of them dropped. While those were down, the rest linked hand in hand, and all spun round together. Then the ring broke, and in separate rings of 2 and 4 they turned and turned until they all stopped at once, began again, struck, clutched, and tore, and then reversed the spin, and all spun round another way. Suddenly they stopped again, paused, struck out the time afresh, formed into lines the width of the public way, and with their heads low down and their hands high up, swooped screaming off. No fight could have been half so terrible as this dance. It was so emphatically a fallen sport, at something, once innocent, delivered over to all devilry, a healthy pastime changed into a means of angering the blood, bewildering the senses, and stealing the heart. Such grace as was visible in it made it the uglier, showing how warped and perverted all things good by nature were become. The maidenly bosom bared to this, the pretty almost child's head thus distracted, the delicate foot mincing in this flower of blood and dirt, were types of the disjointed time. This was the Carmagnole. As it passed, leaving Lucy frightened and Bewildered in the doorway of the Wood-Sawyer's house, the feathery snow fell as quietly and lay as white and soft as if it had never been. Oh, my father! For he stood before her when she lifted up the eyes she had momentarily darkened with her hand, such a cruel, bad sight. I know, my dear, I know. I have seen it many times. Don't be frightened. Not one of them would harm you. I am not frightened for myself, my father, but when I think of my husband and the mercies of these people, we will set him above their mercies very soon. I left him climbing to the window, and I came to tell you. There is no one here to see. You may kiss your hand towards that highest shelving roof. I do so, father, and I send him my soul with it. You cannot see him, my poor dear. No, father, said Lucy, yearning and weeping as she kissed her hand, no. A footstep in the snow. Madame Defarge. I salute you, citizeness, from the doctor. I salute you, citizen. This in passing. Nothing more. Madame Defarge. Gone, like a shadow over the white road. Give me your arm, my love. Pass from here with an air of cheerfulness and courage, for his sake. That was well done, they had left the spot, it shall not be in vain. Charles is summoned for tomorrow. For tomorrow. There is no time to lose. I am well prepared, but there are precautions to be taken that could not be taken until he was actually summoned before the tribunal. He has not received the notice yet, but I know that he will presently be summoned for tomorrow, and removed to the conciergerie. I have timely information. You are not afraid. She could scarcely answer, I trust in you. Do so, implicitly. Your suspense is nearly ended, my darling, he shall be restored to you within a few hours. I have encompassed him with every protection. I must see Laurie. He stopped. There was a heavy lumbering of wheels within hearing. They both knew too well what it meant. 1, 2, 3. 3 tumbrils faring away, with the dread loads over the hushing snow. I must see Laurie, the doctor repeated, turning her another way. The staunch old gentleman was still in his trust, had never left it. He and his books were in frequent requisition as to property confiscated and made national. What he could save for the owners, he saved. No better man living to hold fast by what Tellson's had in keeping, and to hold his peace. A murky red and yellow sky, and a rising mist from the Seine, denoted the approach of darkness. It was almost dark when they arrived at the bank. The stately residence of Monseigneur was altogether blighted and deserted. Above a heap of dust and ashes in the court ran the letters, National Property. Republic. One and indivisible. Liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. Who could that be with Mr. Laurie, the owner of the riding coat upon the chair, who must not be seen? From whom newly arrived did he come out, agitated and surprised, to take his favorite in his arms? To whom did he appear? To repeat her faltering words, when, raising his voice and turning his head towards the door of the room from which he had issued, he said, removed to the conciergerie, and summoned for tomorrow. Next chapter. 6. Triumph. The dread tribunal of 5 judges, public prosecutor, and determined jury, sat every day. Their lists went forth every evening, and were read out by the jailers. of the various prisons to their prisoners. The standard jailer joke was, "Come out and listen to the evening paper, you inside there." Charles Evremond called Darnay. So at last began the evening paper at La Force. When a name was called, its owner stepped apart into a spot reserved for those who were announced as being thus fatally recorded. Charles Evremond, called Darnay, had reason to know the usage. He had seen hundreds pass away. So, his bloated jailer, who wore spectacles to read with, glanced over them too, assure himself that he had taken his place, and went through the list, making a similar short pause at each name. There were 23 names, but only 20 were responded to, for one of the prisoners so summoned had died in jail and been forgotten, and 2 had already been guillotined and forgotten. The list was read in the vaulted chamber where Darnay had seen the associated prisoners on the night of his arrival. Every one of those had perished in the massacre. Every human creature he had since cared for and parted with had died on the scaffold. There were hurried words of farewell and kindness, but the parting was soon over. It was the incident of every day, and the society of La Force were engaged in the preparation of some games of forfeits and a little concert for that evening. They crowded to the grates and shed tears there, but 20 places in the projected entertainments had to be refilled, and the time was, at best, short to the lock-up hour, when the common rooms and corridors would be delivered over to the great dogs who kept watch there through the night. The prisoners were far from insensible or unfeeling. Their ways arose out of the condition of the time. Similarly, though with a subtle difference, a species of fervor or intoxication, known, without doubt, to have led some persons to brave the guillotine unnecessarily, and to die by it, was not mere boastfulness, but a wild infection of the wildly shaken public mind. In seasons of pestilence, some of us will have a secret attraction to the disease, a terrible passing inclination to die of it. And all of us have like wonders hidden in our breasts, only needing circumstances to evoke them. The passage to the conciergerie was short and dark. The night in its vermin-haunted cells was long and cold. Next day, 15 prisoners were put to the bar before Charles Darnay's name was called. All the 15 were condemned, and the trials of the whole occupied an hour and a half. Charles Evremond, called Darnay, was at length arraigned. His judges sat upon the bench in feathered hats, but the rough red cap and tricolored cockade was the headdress otherwise prevailing. Looking at the jury and the turbulent audience, he might have thought that the usual order of things was reversed, and that the felons were trying the honest men. The lowest, cruelest, and worst populace of a city, never without its quantity of low, cruel, and bad, were the directing spirits of the scene, noisily commenting, applauding, disapproving, anticipating, and precipitating the result without a check. Of the men, the greater part were armed in various ways. Of the women, some wore knives, some daggers, some ate and drank as they looked on, many knitted. Among these last was one, with a spare piece of knitting under her arm as she worked. She was in a front row, by the side of a man whom he had never seen since his arrival at the barrier, but whom he directly remembered as Defarge. He noticed that she once or twice whispered in his ear, and that she seemed to be his wife, but what he most noticed in the two figures was that although they were posted as close to himself as they could be. They never looked towards him. They seemed to be waiting for something with a dogged determination, and they looked at the jury, but at nothing else. Under the president sat Dr. Manette, in his usual quiet dress. As well as the prisoner could see, he and Mr. Lorry were the only men there, unconnected with the tribunal, who wore the usual clothes, and had not assumed the coarse garb of the Carmagnole. Charles Evremond, called Darnay, was accused by the public prosecutor as an emigrant whose life was forfeit to the Republic under the decree which banished all emigrants on pain of death. It was nothing that the decree bore date. Since his return to France, there he was, and there was the decree. He had been taken in France, and his head was demanded. "Take off his head," cried the audience. An enemy to the Republic. The president rang his bell to silence those cries, and asked the prisoner whether it was not true that he had lived many years in England. Undoubtedly it was. Was he not an emigrant then? What did he call himself? Not an emigrant, he hoped, within the sense and spirit of the law. Why not? The president desired to know. Because he had voluntarily relinquished a title that was distasteful to him, and a station that was distasteful to him, and had left his country, he submitted. Before the word emigrant in the present acceptation by the tribunal was in use, to live by his own industry in England, rather than on the industry of the overladen people of France. What proof had he of this? He handed in the names of two witnesses, Theophile Gabelle and Alexandra Manette, but he had married in England. The president reminded him. True, but not an English woman. A citizeness of France. Yes, by birth. Her name and family. Lucy Manette, only daughter of Dr. Manette, the good physician who sits there. This answer had a happy effect upon the audience. Cries in exaltation of the well-known good physician rent the hall. So capriciously were the people moved, that tears immediately rolled down several ferocious countenances, which had been glaring at the prisoner a moment before, as if with impatience to pluck him out into the streets and kill him. On these few steps of his dangerous way, Charles Darnay had set his foot. According to Dr. Manette's reiterated instructions, the same cautious counsel directed every step that lay before him, and had prepared every inch of his road. The president asked why had he returned to France when he did, and not sooner. He had not returned sooner, he replied, simply because he had no means of living in France, save those he had resigned, whereas, in England, he lived by giving instruction in the French language and literature. He had returned when he did, on the pressing and written entreaty of a French citizen who represented that his life was endangered by his absence. He had come back to save a citizen's life, and to bear his testimony, at whatever personal hazard, to the truth. Was that criminal in the eyes of the Republic? The populace cried enthusiastically, no. And the president rang his bell to quiet them, which it did not, for they continued to cry no, until they left off, at their own will. The president required the name of that citizen. The accused explained that the citizen was his first witness. He also referred with confidence to the citizen's letter, which had been taken from him at the barrier, but which he did not doubt would be found among the papers then before the president. The doctor had taken care that it should be there, had assured him that it would be there, and at this stage of the proceedings it was produced and read. Citizen Gabel was called to confirm it, and did so. Citizen Gabel hinted with infinite delicacy and politeness that in the pressure of business imposed on the tribunal by the multitude of enemies of the Republic with which it had to deal, he had been slightly overlooked in his prison of the Abbaye, in fact, had rather passed out of the tribunal's patriotic remembrance, until 3 days ago, when he had been summoned before it, and had been set at liberty on the juries, declaring themselves satisfied that the accusation against him was answered as to himself by the surrender of the citizen Evremond, called Darnay. Dr. Manette was next questioned. His high personal popularity and the clearness of his answers made a great impression, but, as he proceeded, as he showed that the accused was his first friend on his release from his long imprisonment, that the accused had remained in England, always faithful and devoted to his daughter and himself in their exile, that, so far from being in favor with the aristocrat government there, he had actually been tried for his life by it, as the foe of England and friend of the United States, as he brought these circumstances into view with the greatest discretion and with the straightforward force of truth and earnestness, the jury and the populace became one. At last, when he appealed by name to Monsieur Lorry, an English gentleman then and there present, who, like himself, had been a witness on that English trial and could corroborate his account of it, the jury declared that they had heard enough, and that they were ready with their votes if the President were content to receive them. At every vote, the jurymen voted aloud and individually. The populace set up a shout of applause. All the voices were in the prisoner's favor, and the President declared him free. Then began one of those extraordinary scenes with which the populace sometimes gratified their fickleness, or their better impulses towards generosity and mercy, or which they regarded as some set-off against their swollen account of cruel rage. No man can decide now to which of these motives such extraordinary scenes were referable. It is probable to a blending of all the three, with the second predominating. No sooner was the acquittal pronounced, than tears were shed as freely as blood at another time, and such fraternal embraces were bestowed upon the prisoner by as many of both sexes as could rush at him, that after his long and unwholesome confinement he was in danger of fainting from exhaustion, none the less because he knew very well that the very same people, carried by another current, would have rushed at him with the very same intensity to rend him to pieces and strew him over the streets. His removal, to make way for other accused persons who were to be tried, rescued him from these caresses for the moment. 5 were to be tried together. Next, as enemies of the Republic, for as much as they had not assisted it by word or deed. So quick was the tribunal to compensate itself and the nation for a chance lost, that these 5 came down to him before he left the place, condemned to die within 24 hours. The first of them told him so, with the customary prison sign of death, a raised finger, and they all added in words, "Long live the Republic." The 5 had had, it is true, no audience to lengthen their proceedings, for when he and Dr. Manette emerged from the gate, there was a great crowd about it, in which there seemed to be every face he had seen in court, except 2, for which he looked in vain. On his coming out, the concourse made at him anew, weeping, embracing, and shouting, all by turns and all together, until the very tide of the river on the bank of which the mad scene was acted, seemed to run mad, like the people on the shore. They put him into a great chair they had among them, and which they had taken either out of the court itself, or one of its rooms or passages. Over the chair they had thrown a red flag, and to the back of it they had bound a pike with a red cap on its top. In this car of triumph, not even the doctor's entreaties could prevent his being carried to his home on men's shoulders, with a confused sea of red caps heaving about him, and casting up to side from the stormy deep such wrecks of faces, that he more than once misdoubted his mind being in confusion, and that he was in the tumbrel on his way to the guillotine. In wild dreamlike procession, embracing whom they met and pointing him out, they carried him on, reddening the snowy streets with the prevailing republican color, in winding and tramping through them, as they had reddened them below the snow with a deeper dye. They carried him thus into the courtyard of the building where he lived. Her father had gone on before to prepare her, and when her husband stood upon his feet, she dropped insensible in his arms. As he held her to his heart and turned her beautiful head between his face and the brawling crowd, so that his tears and her lips might come together unseen, a few of the people fell to dancing. Instantly all the rest fell to dancing, and the courtyard overflowed with the carmagnole. Then they elevated into the vacant chair a young woman from the crowd, to be carried as the goddess of liberty, and then swelling and overflowing out into the adjacent street, and along the river's bank, and over the bridge, the carmagnole absorbed them every one and whirled them away. After grasping the doctor's hand, as he stood victorious and proud before him, after grasping the hand of Mr. Lorry, who came panting in breathless from his struggle against the waterspout of the carmagnole, after kissing little Lucy, who was lifted up to clasp her arms round his neck, and after embracing the ever zealous and faithful Pross, who lifted her, he took his wife in his arms, and carried her up to their rooms. Lucy, my own, I am safe. Oh, dearest Charles, let me thank God for this on my knees, as I have prayed to him. They all reverently bowed their heads and hearts. When she was again in his arms, he said to her, "And now speak to your father, dearest. No other man in all this France could have done what he has done for me." She laid her head upon her father's breast, as she had laid his poor head on her own breast long, long ago. He was happy in the return he had made her. He was recompensed for his suffering. He was proud of his strength. "You must not be weak, my darling," he remonstrated. "Don't tremble so. I have saved him.